Attorney General Barr, I'd like to finish up our discussion of the health care law. Our Republican colleagues in the Senate, and in particular Senator McConnell, have made it clear that they have no intention of introducing, let alone passing, a new health care law, a new health care plan for at least the next 2 years. And apparently that view has been prevailed upon the White House, and the President has accepted it. My question is, we've already discussed the devastating effects if this lawsuit wins and repeals the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Given the position of the Senate Republicans and the President himself opposing any progress on health care for the next 2 years, if the Supreme Court of the United States were to grant credence to your position, sweep away the health care law, either in part or in entirety, would the Department of Justice support a stay of the effect of that ruling until Congress, the President, this nation can formulate a plan properly to supplant the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act?
Well, you're asking me to speculate whether or not we're going to, the administration's position is going to prevail in court. Beyond that, whether if it does prevail in court, when that is, also whether or not there'll be a legislative response if, in fact, we prevail. That's
absolutely true. I'm asking you to speculate on those, and if questions are proper in this room, Attorney General. If you win the case, will you agree that we ought to stay the effect of that until a new plan can go in place, rather than strand all the people with pre-existing conditions and all the people that whose health care will lapse because of that ruling?
Well, from my experience, the Supreme Court would likely deal with that in their opinion and provide some kind of period to wind it down.
You want them to do it sua sponte, on their own motion, with no prompting from the Justice Department. Is that it?
I didn't say that. I'd say, you know, whatever the administration's position is at that point, we'll carry out from a legal standpoint.
Well, I'm dismayed to hear that you're willing to drive our health care system off the cliff with no plan for replacing it.
Well, I think your premise that the Justice Department makes health care policy is simply wrong. We take legal positions in cases.
Well, I'm going to follow that up. Numerous reports have indicated that you, the chief lawyer for the federal government, and Secretary Azar, who is the lead on health care, our federal government, strongly argued against supporting the complete repeal of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. However, reports indicate you and Secretary Azar were overruled by Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and the President himself. Now, at any point, did you convey either to Mr. Mulvaney or the President any concerns about either the effects of this lawsuit prevailing, if it does, or concerns about the dubious legal arguments in this lawsuit? And did Secretary Azar communicate concerns about the effects on our American healthcare system?
Well, I'm not going to get into, you know, the internal deliberations of the administration on this point. I had ample opportunity to present my views. And I believe that the final decision reached is a legally defensible and reasonable legal position. It is a position that prevailed in the district court, and it is a position taken by the 4 dissenting justices in the NFIB case, which is that once you do away with the mandate, the rest of the statute cannot stand.
Are you citing executive privilege by declining to tell me about the discussions between you, Mr. Azar, Mr. Mulvaney?
Call it what you wish. I'm not discussing it.
You're refusing to discuss it. All right. Well, it's a decision that makes more extreme and, in fact, even contradicts. The decision to go forward with this position contradicts the DOJ's June 2018 position on the case, which was so controversial then that 3 of the 4 career attorneys representing the government refused to sign on to the briefs and actually remove themselves from the case. The American people deserve to understand if you and Secretary Azar support this lawsuit based on sound rationale, or if it was just bald politics talking.
I said
I'm
it was-
requesting that you submit this of executive privilege in writing to this committee if that is what you're doing. Don't ask us to call it what it is. I'm asking you, if you're exercising executive privilege, we need to know it, and we need to know it in writing. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.